literally grew up in a family that could have been termed scientific atheist in nature. This is literally what my upbringing looked like. My grandmother was a devout, I think, Methodist. Her husband was a preacher. But my dad didn't really buy into any of that when he was a younger man, and I'm not sure how that changed as he became older. I couldn't tell you. I know, though, that as a young man, he was very much into science and believed that it was a wonderful thing. And I'm going to tell you something. I've titled today's piece on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. By the way, I'm your host. I'm Kurt, and today is Saturday, the 28th of May of 2022. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloutHub, on my Facebook page. That's the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there. On Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com, on Minds, MINDS.com, on the Kurt's Religion and Politics group there, on Parler, on Gab, on Twitter. I've titled my piece today, The Benefits of Science, and that was sort of tongue-in-cheek, but the truth is there really have been some wonderful benefits to science. Let me go ahead and go through my notes, and I'll kind of explain where I'm coming from today. I'm not saying science is not beneficial. My thoughts have actually changed on that over the course of time. That said, I believe far too many, especially young, but even older people, are sold on what science says is true and correct. The reality is, science doesn't say that for the most part. Good science tends to say, this looks like something that's generally reasonable to accept, believe, or count on. And by the way, it generally does that with the caveat that this may change in the course of time. By the time I was an adult, my view of science and those who heavily invested in it would have been counted jaundiced at best. And I had been one of those people as a younger person, so literally my younger life was looked at somewhat in disdain. I felt like there was nothing in science I could believe in. That's not really true. There were some things I guess I realized I had to accept and count as correct, even though science said they weren't true. As I got older, I began to realize I was working from bad emotional perspectives. Bad, by the way, was in parents. I was going to say emotional perspectives, and I decided I wanted to add bad in there. Frankly, most emotional perspectives are bad, by the way. Most of them are bad. I started to come to the conclusion science had its place. What's important to realize, though, is that I never did come to the conclusion it should be treated, as absolutely correct or truthful. Logical process, and particularly where it's deemed as scientific, is about modeling things in ways that make sense. It's about making it possible to have some means to understand our universe and the things in it. You should not, however, assume because something is labeled as science, it's somehow beyond question. I've said before and will repeat today, one of the jobs of PhD candidates is to prove things others believed correct to be problematic in some way, sometimes just outright wrong. Many seeking that degree in scientific fields literally spend their time working to topple the work of others who came before them. To be fair, sometimes what they say is at best questionable, but lots of times it's useful and worthwhile at the very least. Even so, a good many people have changed the way folks thought about given things, knocking over existing hypotheses in the process. Worst of all to me are those people who assume because something holds the mantle of being scientific, I'm not allowed, whether highly trained or not, to question the veracity of what's being postulated. What has been postulated would be a better thing to say. There was a time, not too very long ago, 100 years past maybe a little longer, maybe 150, maybe 200, when there were people who were unencumbered by things like degrees who nonetheless spent their time, sometimes only the time they weren't working at some paying pursuit, delving into things scientific. It's been a relatively recent thing that an expectation of a sheepskin was bundled with doing that sort of thing. Where you might find that many who carried the label scientist in past worked with various institutes of higher learning, many of them, if they had a degree at all, had it bestowed as a result of their tremendous work, not as a function of them learning about how to be scientists. Look, I'm not telling you to ignore or not apply scientific method and concept. I'm not trying to tell you to do that. I'm just saying don't assume just because something appears to have popular consent or agreement, consensus, whatever you want to say, it can't be wrong. There was a time when people thought the system of heavenly bodies in which we found ourselves was geocentric. The Earth was at the center. It's now accounted heliocentric. That is, the sun is at the center, right? Instead. Which appears to be correct, right? People were killed for saying as much before acceptance of the new theory was widely, how things were. Let's not go back to that place. Love science and the methods associated with it? Good for you. That said, don't treat it like a religion. Science is not about bowing to the, golden calves that people out there are erecting, trying to get others to believe that what they're saying, doing, so forth, is the only possible answer to how things work. That's not what science is. Science is about people contributing in trying to develop models for our world that can then be used to accomplish certain ends that may not have been able to be done or may have been very hard to do, or however you want to look at it before. That's what science is. Please stop assuming or believing that because somebody says this is what the science says, we can't and won't at some time in the future come to the conclusion that what people did with that was correct, and that and the idea that now that's what science says and therefore we should castigate people or cut the legs out from under people who say that they don't believe that that's how that works, that's just wrong. No scientist worth his or her salt should tell you that if you disagree with them on something that they hold to be true, that means that you're wrong. They might say that they favor the position they have. They might even say they strongly believe what they're saying is true. But what you need to know is that doesn't mean that someone somewhere down the road isn't going to go, what the heck are you talking about, caloric? No, there isn't some liquid that flows from one thing or another that transfers heat. That's not how heat transference works, people. And this kind of thing has happened any number of times before. Any number of times. It's not something that just recently happened when somebody said, I question whether or not this vaccine is actually beneficial. No, this is something that's been happening throughout the history of humanity, and it's a good thing. It's good for us to question the status quo. It's good for us to refuse to accept that this is the only possible solution. If Isaac Newton or I'm trying to think of his name, Albert Einstein or Feynman or any one of these guys had just assumed that what other people told them was correct, they never would have come up with new groundbreaking ideas. Heisenberg, whoever it happens to be, they never would have come up with groundbreaking ideas that made it so that they came to the understanding of what they did. And sometimes, so there's this television show that used to run called MASH, in which they talked about Korean hemorrhagic fever and the idea that they were using high sodium IV drips, and that when you went to low sodium IV drips, things actually, the prognosis for improvement actually got so much better, right? They didn't know. Nobody knew. They were doing what they thought was going to work at the time, and it turns out, hey, guess what? They were actually mistaken about that. Science is about questioning. Science is not about setting hypotheses in stone and refusing to allow anybody else to call those ideas into question. That's not what science is about, guys. It's just not. Science, if somebody disagrees with you, you may believe they're wrong. You can do that. That's okay. Don't castigate them for it. Don't like I say, cut the legs out from under them. Don't refuse to hear anything they have to say because you think they're wrong. And that's not just true for science either, by the way. But my point is to say that people are treating science as some sort of golden calf idol at the moment, instead of realizing just because somebody looks like they're correct today doesn't mean somebody else is not going to come along who's going to come up with better answers to what basically is reasonable, what's proper, and so forth. That's not how that works, okay? Please stop assuming that just because somebody comes up with something that looks like it works doesn't mean somebody's not going to come up with something later that's either going to refine that or toss it totally on its ear and give you better answers in what they're doing. This is a problem that we have in the modern day, and particularly among people, funnily, who are not scientists. Okay, this has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt, and today is Saturday, the 28th of May of 2022. That means tomorrow will be Sunday, the 29th of May of 2022. Today being the end of the Sabbath at sundown today. Tomorrow being that beginning of the Christian week, according to most folks' reckoning who happen to be Christian. Thank you for everyone who's been here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloudHub, on my Facebook page. That would be the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there, on Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com, on Minds, MINDS.com, on the Kurt's Religion and Politics group primarily there, blah, blah, blah. Excuse my stumbling here. On Parler, on Gab, on Twitter, or wherever else you happen to be seeing or hearing me today. Subject for today has been benefits of science, and tomorrow we're going to talk about an interesting idea. That idea would be blaming the past. I want to talk about this idea that people are saying, well, we're where we are because of this particular thing or this particular group or whatever it has to be in history. No, you're where you are because you choose not to question, but we'll get into that in tomorrow's edition of the Daily Summation. Hope you're doing well today. Hope everything is going well for you. And hopefully we will see you on tomorrow's edition of the Daily Summation. That will be Sunday, the 29th of May of 2022's edition. And hopefully, as I say, everything continues to go well for you. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This podcast was created on Saturday, the 28th of May of 2022. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching today's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back tomorrow to check out the next one. Remember, on various platforms, primarily Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub, and the audio podcast, you can subscribe to my content. For the audio podcast, you probably want to use Apple, Google, or Spotify. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. In order to find me on those platforms, you can go to the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub. You can also get to my content on Facebook by finding the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there, Minds, MINDS.com, where you will find me at the Kurt's Religion and Politics group, and Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com as well. You can look there. I post my daily video on various social media sites, really only about 3, Parler, Gab, and Twitter at present. I am at KP Schubert on each of them, and you can find me under them, and you can find the videos under me. You should be able to find my podcasts on Google and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's also on podcasts.kpschubert.com. That's podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. If you're looking for me on various of the podcast sites, you probably want to search Kurt's Religion and Politics, not the Daily Summation. Keep in mind, you can subscribe to my content on various places that I put it. All constructive feedback is welcome. You can like, dislike, add a rumble, or give whatever feedback is available on any of the platforms that you can do such things. You can also add a comment on what I put there. Unless you're advertising or doing something that I believe will harm others, I'll leave your comments out there even if I don't agree with or understand them. I will try to let you know I've seen them when possible and may reply if I feel it's reasonable, appropriate, and possible, of course. Thanks again for viewing this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back again for tomorrow's